For tonight's Common Ground segment, we're going to discuss the war in Ukraine, foreign policy on a number of issues. Joining us are Washington Democratic Congressman Adam Smith and Colorado Republican Representative Doug Lamborn. Chairman Smith, I want to ask you about what you're hearing and seeing from Ukraine and how you interpret it.
Well, I mean, the big news here is Ukraine's counteroffensive is really having an effect. We've seen the progress they made in Kharkiv, moving down into Luhansk and Donetsk. They're having progress towards taking Kherson. They've really punched back and started to retake territory. And this has caused a lot of chaos in Russia, as we've seen as they've attempted their mass mobilization. So I think that is the big headline, is Ukraine's success. Russia obviously is having the brutal response that they're having. But the last key point on this is the coalition is holding together, the coalition to support Ukraine. And that's what Doug and I were able to see when we visited our NATO partners in Europe over the last week. It's tough, but they understand how important it is to preserve Ukraine's sovereignty. And the coalition is holding together. And that, I think, is good news.
Congressman Lamborn, you're common ground here with the chairman. What's your thoughts and what you saw from that trip?
Chairman Smith led this delegation of armed services members to 4 southern European countries: Croatia, Greece, Spain, and Portugal. They're all members of NATO. They are all very united. They're looking for U.S. leadership. They're more or less doing their best to meet the Wales Pledge, 2% of their GDP devoted to defense. And they know it's going to be a hard winter for their populations, their citizens, because of energy costs going up. These are southern countries that are not as cold maybe as some in the north, but they're going to have problems, maybe even politically, with people having really high heating bills and things like that. But they do want to do whatever it takes to defeat Vladimir Putin. What he's doing is an attack on Western values, and it cannot stand. And they are very united, and that was heartening to see. And
you're united, Republicans, Democrats, at least on the committee. I saw a tweet you had talking about the off-ramp chatter, Congressman Lamborn. You said, what do you get? A dictator who wages an unprovoked war against his neighbor and commits unspeakable human atrocities for his birthday. Definitely not an off-ramp. Congressman, you know there are people in your party who look at what's happening now and say, when is this going to stop? And how far does the U.S. go? How do you respond to them?
Bret, there are extremists in both parties that are not with us 100%. There are some progressives who want to cut defense. There are some isolationists on the right wing. They are in the minority. And people like Adam Smith and I and other members of the Armed Services Committee, we hear about the threats every day. And we get it. We understand how serious this is. All of our colleagues don't necessarily hear all of the same things that we hear, but we're trying to educate them so they'll be with us on board. But I think that we have a strong unity, and it's seen in the fact that we've increased defense spending even over the president's proposed budget each of the last 2 years. And we are very united for the most part in Congress.
Chairman Smith, the numbers are kind of staggering. If you look at what we've put into Ukraine already, just doing the math, it's about $27 billion roughly in U.S. aid to Ukraine. And obviously people look at that as you get closer to an election and say, what is the payoff for the U.S.? And then you add to that the concern over nuclear war. And what the president said over the weekend at a Democratic fundraiser, that we're closer now to Armageddon than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. What's your reaction to that statement and whether that was the right thing to say at this moment?
Well, 2 things. First of all, I think we have to continually make the case, because as Doug outlined, this isn't easy. The impact on energy, certainly, but food, we've seen inflation go up. I mean, Ukraine and Russia provide important resources for the world that just aren't there now because of this conflict. We have to make the case for why this matters, and I think Doug did a pretty good job of it. Look, what Russia is attempting to do is bring us back to a world where military might and autocracy dominated neighbors. We want a rules-based international order that respects sovereignty. So what's on the line here certainly is Ukraine, no doubt about it, but it is a much broader principle. And trust me, China is watching as well. as China makes claims against the sovereign territory of at least a half dozen nations in Asia, this will send a strong message as to whether or not they can just use their brute force to grab them. So this is important to us. Now, as for the president's comments about Armageddon, I think it is absolutely right to be mindful of the risks here. And I think President Biden has struck a very good balance to date in terms of his policy. You know, he has supported Ukraine. It's making the huge difference that we've seen. The HIMARS systems, the weapons that are getting them are beginning to give Ukraine that upper hand. And President Biden deserves a ton of credit for pulling together the coalition that did that, while also saying we are not going to directly fight Russia. We are not going to do that because we don't want to have that conflict. So,
but let me just interrupt you real quick. If you're going to go down that road and say that he's doing a great job, if we are as close as we are to Armageddon, shouldn't he have that conversation with the American people and not at a Democratic fundraiser?
Well, he has had that conversation with the American people. He has stated over and over again, and I won't restate it, but the policy that I just basically said, he has said over and over again. Look, I mean, presidents go to fundraisers and they answer questions and they have conversations. I mean, that's true of Democrats and Republicans alike.
True.
So I think the president has repeatedly said what he's doing here. You know, I wouldn't necessarily have chosen the words the way he did at that particular event, but none of us say everything exactly right every time. His policy, what he's actually been implementing, has been working and has struck that balance in the way it needs to be.
And last word, Congressman Lamborn, your message is that there is unity up there on Capitol Hill on this issue specifically.
There really is. We will support the funding that it takes. Every single person may not be with us on this, but we will support the funding. We have strong majorities. Vladimir Putin is doing exactly what Adolf Hitler did, and Adam Smith outlined that very clearly. He's invading weaker, smaller neighbors. He's provoking ethnic grievances. These are things totally against Western values, and he's really close, dangerously close to invading a NATO, or at least harming NATO members, where we have an all for one collective commitment to defend each other. Yeah. So he's treading on dangerous ground, and he only understands force. We can't let up on the gas now. We have to keep working and doing this. And I think under Chairman Smith and Ranking Member Mike Rogers of Alabama, we are doing a great job as a committee, and we'll continue taking that message to all of our colleagues in Congress.
Yeah, it's a precarious time. People are worried about it, and we appreciate you coming on Common Ground, both of you.